Slow reps versus fast reps. Which one should you be doing?
Don't you want to look good naked?
So when we're talking about slow reps versus fast reps, it's going to be highly dependent on the part of the movement that you're in. So I'll give you an example. If you're performing a bicep curl and you're going through the concentric motion, which just means lifting the weight up, that is going to be the part where we're focused on shortening the muscle or squeezing it at the top. So we want to create a lot of force throughout that. The issue is if you just let that weight drop back down, then you're missing out on a lot of the force that's created as you're lowering that weight, or the eccentric portion of that lift. So there isn't like a hard and fast, you should be, lifting weights slow or you should be lifting weights fast. It depends on the movement. It depends on your tempo. It depends on what part of the movement you're doing. So again, with that bicep curl, I would say lifting up as fast as you can in that concentric motion, and then focusing on not necessarily lowering it as slow as possible, but focusing on controlling that motion down so that you can create as much tension throughout that muscle as possible through the entire rep. The reason why that's important is because when we're focused on building muscle, we want to make sure that we are creating that mechanical tension. Mechanical tension is what is the main driver of muscle growth. So mostly just focusing on controlling your reps and being intentional with what you're doing throughout can be important. One thing though is we don't want to focus on our reps being too slow, because that can take away from the movement itself and can actually take away from what we're really trying to get out of it. So within slow versus fast reps, something else that comes into play is tempo. And that's really where we're getting into, okay, during the portion of the movement, what should I be focusing on? Or for example, how many seconds should I be lowering or raising or pausing throughout that movement? If we're looking at tempo, there's a way that we describe tempo. It's in 4 numbers. So this can get a little bit confusing, but once you kind of understand how to read the numbers, it makes a lot more sense and you'll start to understand it more over time. So tempo numbers, again, it just refers to how long you're spending in the specific portion of the lift. So let's take a squat, for example. When you are starting at the top of the movement, you're lowering down. That's going to be the first portion of the lift. Then when you pause at the bottom, that's the second portion of the lift. Then when you explode up, that's the third portion of the lift. And then when you're at the top before you start that next rep, that's considered the 4th position of that rep. So that's where those 4 numbers come from. So let's take, for example, a 3-1-1-0 tempo. So what that means is that 3-1-1-0, the first 3 refers to the lowering. So you're gonna lower at a 3-second pace. So you start that squat and you're lowering 3, 2, 1. The second number is 1. So you're gonna pause for 1 second at the bottom. The third number is also 1. So you're gonna explode up in a 1 count. And the fourth number is 0. So you're gonna pause for 0 before you go into the next rep. So that's one example of how to use tempo with a squat, and you can see that throughout that entire squat, you're actually performing both a slow portion and a fast portion. The slower portion is that eccentric or the lowering phase, and the faster portion is that explosion up. So you're creating that power as you go up, and you're creating a lot of tension as you come down. Those are both important parts of building as much muscle as possible, because we want to create as much tension in the muscle fiber as possible. And we also want to make sure that we're recruiting our muscle fibers as much as we can through that power portion or that force portion. Let's go back to the bicep curl example for a second. And how would we implement tempo and read tempo when we're talking about something like a bicep curl? So this is where things get a little complex, because that first number is not actually where you're starting the lift, because it changes depending on what the lift that you're doing. So that first number is always gonna be the lowering portion of the lift, no matter what you're doing. So with a bicep curl, although you curl up and your starting position is at the bottom and you curl up, the lowering portion is actually at the top as you come down. So I'll kind of clear this up a little bit. If you're doing a bicep curl and you're trying to pay attention to tempo and you're trying to read tempo, let's use that 3-1-1-0 example again. I would actually start counting that tempo at the top as I'm lowering. So I'd lower the dumbbell, 3, 2, 1, pause for 1 second at the bottom, and then I'd explode up 1 second and then pause 0 at the top. So some people ask the question, should you be training with faster reps to recruit more fast twitch muscles? I think it all comes back to primarily what your goals are, whether that's sports specific or not, but also just realizing that the more force you can produce with whatever you're doing, whatever movement you're doing, the better off you're gonna be. Because if you can create that force production, you're gonna be continuing to recruit those muscle fibers, whether it's type 1, type 2, type whatever, all the nerdy stuff. Just pay attention to, okay, what's your main goal? Why are you doing this? And are you truly focused on creating as much tension throughout that muscle as possible if hypertrophy is your main goal? Or if your main goal is sport specific, you know, like Olympic lifting, for example, you may be focused more on that side of things. Women, we believe